I felt like the blood had drained out of my body. I knew my 30s were gone.
You were an anthropology student, and you went from that to heroin dealer in an alarmingly short period of time.
I don't want to be it.
What about heroin?
It's such a lovely drug.
Terry Clarke, who's probably better known as Mr. Asia.
He would kill you.
What are those first few days like after losing your freedom?
I was only 23.
Did you ever contemplate taking your own life at that point?
I can't handle anymore. I'll never forgive you. I've got an honest heart.
Oh, good, you're here. Come on. This is the centre of performance. Whenever there's a top performance in New Zealand, it all comes from here. That's Lisa Carrington. She's been doing that for days. That's the boy who got the hole-in-one in Taupo. Oh, he did it again. Hey, Finn, how's the performance going?
Top tier.
Nice. This is our Generate room. In here, you'll find our top performers helping Kiwis maximise their KiwiSaver investments. Get in here, Finn. Maximise. Right, Generate. Putting performance first.
Greg Newbold, welcome to my podcast.
Oh, thanks. Good to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. Just a second ago, you were asking me what a podcast is.
Yeah. I'm low tech. Yeah. I haven't even got a cell phone. You know.
Yeah, do you not?
No.
How do you get by without a cell phone?
I got a landline.
Right.
And
You've still got a landline.
I got a landline. I got email.
What about when you go out of town?
Write letters.
What about if you want to get a hold of someone now?
Wow. I don't.
Oh, good on you.
I know my wife's got a cell phone, so I rely on her. But because when you go away a lot, you know, nowadays you've got to have a thing like an app, and you've got to do a screen. What do they call them? Those round things with the squares on. You got to go flick on them, and I can't do it. So I have to get her to do it. Even if I'm going to send something to the United States, like I send a copy of my book to some people I know in the US, nowadays you have to do the QR code, it's called. You click the QR code, put in the data, get a barcode, take the barcode into Post Shop. Well, I can't do that because I haven't got a cell phone.
I'm going to be...
that means I'm isolated.
Yeah.
I'm becoming increasingly isolated because when you go on a ship cruise, all the purchases have to be done with your QR code.
Why don't you just get a bloody phone?
I don't like them.
I'm going to be... it's like I'm staring at my future self. I'm 53. When I'm 74, I'm going to be exactly the same as you. I feel like I'm getting left behind with some tech stuff now.
Yeah.
Anyway, hey, it's great to have you here. Brand new book out, Dream Dealer. How do you feel about it?
I like the book. I had a hell of a lot of fun writing it. When I first got retired, a few people were asking me to write my memoirs, and I just couldn't face it because I'd been sitting in front of a computer plunking away for the last 30 years, and I'd retired and that was all finished for me, but now it's 4 years later and 5 years later, I decided, I could do that, And so I started remembering everything, and just like I did when I wrote The Big Huey, which was my first book.
Your prison diaries in the early 80s.
Yeah, in the early 80s.
So, like from the perspective now of a pensioner, writing about your 5 years incarcerated from like 1975 to 1980, a lot of that time at maximum security. Paremoremo. Is it? Do you look back now, like from the perspective of where you are with like rose-tinted glasses, or is it still like a triggering and jarring thing to write about?
Well, jail in those days was a lot easier than it is now. Jail. They actually cared about us. The prison administration cared about us, and they cared about us in Wellington, and we had pretty good conditions because it was right at the end of that liberal period, which started in the 1960s with the Hannon-Robson era and then continued through until about the end of the 70s when the gangs started coming in and taking over the jails, and all the camaraderie of the prisons was lost. All the solidarity that inmates had, especially at Paremoremo, was lost because the gang ethic took over, and it became that you became a gang member first and an inmate second, Whereas when I was in jail, you were an inmate first, and your gang membership was irrelevant. And there weren't a lot of gangsters in jail either in those days. We stuck together. And when the inmates came into Paremoremo, they were told by the old hands, you're not a gang member anymore.
We're all the same. We're inmates.
Yeah, we're all inmates.
Yeah,
and because once you break up that solidarity, you lose your strength. And we had a lot of community strength and community spirit, particularly in maximum security. That made it a good environment to do time, and because people cared about each other, and they cared about the collective, about our collective interests. You know.
Yeah, you talk about this in the book, and just the gang culture of the 1970s, where it was just sort of like based on American gangs, like Hell's Angels, and what was the other one?
Hell's Angels, Black Power,
there was Black
Headhunters, Mongrel Mob. They were all there, particularly in the lower security. They weren't prominent in high security. The only real gangs in high security were the Headhunters and the Hell's Angels, because a whole bunch of them came in for the killing of Bradley Hauora. And so there was a group of angels in there, but they didn't flout their membership. They were inmates like the rest of us.
This is going to be a great podcast. I can tell just from this opening 5 minutes, because there's two very distinct chapters to your life. There's the drug dealer, and then the incarceration period.
Yeah.
And then there's the huge period of like 30 years where you were working at the University of Canterbury, and you were like the go-to criminologist. Every time you turn on the TV and there's a story about crime, you'd see your face on TV. So This is going to be good. The byline for your book is called From Prisoner to Professor. If you were at a prisoner and professor party, which of those two groups would you gravitate towards?
Depends on what the party was, but and whether I knew them. But I get on pretty well with ordinary guys from the underworld, but knockabouts. You know, I get on well with knockabouts.
People that have got some scars on their backs.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, when I was at Canterbury University, I was very, very close to a lot of people, particularly in the engineering faculty, and also a mate of mine called Robin Bond, who came from Classics, and I had some really good times with them, and Peter Goff from engineering, and Cynthia Hawes from law, and Andy Buchanan from engineering. You know, those ordinary people. I don't get on well with academics, people who identify as academics or as scholars. But, you know, when you're in those kinds of circles, they're sort of people who like having parties, like having fun, and also in the tango community, which I joined. I love the tango community, and a lot of them came from a lot of the tango community were educated people, and they came from areas like medicine, art, a lot of artists, poets, and those guys got on real well with the tango community. So I wouldn't say I would prefer one group over another. Really, I just get on with I've got a variety of friends from different walks of life, and I get on with all of them. I mean, I've got a lot of friends in the hunting community, you know, hunting and fishing and diving sort of thing.
Look at you go, hunter by day, tango by night.
yeah.
Hey, the last paragraph of the book, I've gone through the book. So I'm not giving away any spoilers, but the last paragraph, which I really like, I've had a wonderful life. At 74, I don't think I've ever been more content. Lucy and I thrive in each other's company. I love being alive, and I'm not looking forward to dying. I'm actually trying to put it off. It's a good line. Yeah. For me, getting old is marvellous, and retirement is everything it's cracked up to be. I recommend both. Everyone loves a happy ending. It's great that you've got this peace and contentment at this stage of life, right?
Yeah. You know, I've had a really good life, an interesting life, a lot of variety. I've made lots of friends, got to know a hell of a lot of nice people from all walks of life, you know, from all walks of life, because I'm still in contact with quite a few of the people who I was in prison with, and I'm still very good friends with them, and I'm friends with all sorts of people, and And that really enriches your life, actually, having friends with different perspectives on the world and that.
This young version of you on the cover, handsome young fella.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's before I became ugly.
Well, time remains undefeated, right? How are you the same as that young man on the cover? And how do you feel the same when you look at that? Do you recognise it's you?
Yeah. Yeah, my personality was always, the basics of my personality have always been unchanged, really. I've always considered myself to be a principled person, and people might say, oh, well, then how come you're selling heroin? Well, I was in the heroin community and I was a good dealer. I was an honest heroin dealer.
Yeah, you say that in the book. You never used to cut it?
No, I never would cut my gear.
Selling it pure.
I always sell good gear to people. I would give them a good deal, but we were using the same. I was using smack and selling to the people who were selling to me. I was only a small-time dealer.
Yeah.
I was portrayed in the trial as a
kingpin,
Mr. Big, but in actual fact, I wasn't. It was just the way the police portrayed it, because they wanted to get a big sentence and they wanted to get credit for having busted a bloody big heroin ring. In actual fact, I was just a street dealer.
Yeah.
I was a bloody minnow.
Yeah, we're going to get into all that. Yeah, 34 grams is what you caught with. Now, there's more of an understanding on drugs now, and I think they understand it's more of a health issue. For an amount like that, which is, for supply, you'd probably get home detention maybe, wouldn't you?
Yeah, pretty much. And nowadays, I said before, the prisons were easier when I was in there, but the sentences were longer. Nowadays, the sentences a lot of them are derisory, I think. When you get people hitting people and killing them, knocking people, punching them without their defences, and the people get knocked out like that MMA fighter who got knocked out.
Falvake, yeah. We've redefined it. We call it a coward punch now.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Coward punching, yeah. Well, I tell you, and the sentences people are getting for that are bloody ridiculously short,
so light,
in my view.
Yeah.
It's only if it's got a sexual element. If there's a sexual element in it, you're gone for a long time. And if there's no sexual element, you can kill a kid, beat a child to death, and quite often the sentence they get is small compared to the gravity of the offence and the impact it has on the victim. These sentences are they don't fit the crime, in my view. But like prisons are much harder though.
There's I've got a whole section later on about your criminologist career, and just from that answer, I think there's going to be a lot of hot takes there. Yeah. Your views about crime and punishment in New Zealand at the moment. First of all, can I say you're looking really good? So you turned 75 in a couple of months, and you're super fit, right? What's your daily routine? You run every day? You're on the bike every day?
I have a 6-day routine, and I do two 1,500 metre swims, 2 40k bike rides or 2-hour bike rides, and 2 gym workouts, weight workouts, which is about I do about 50 minutes, and I do that every day, and I have one day off normally. And that day I might go. I used to climb up Mount Maunganui, Moa, but now that's shut because of the landslide, so I don't do that anymore. But I keep pretty fit.
And am I right in assuming that your love of movement began in jail? You started long distance running while you were incarcerated?
I actually, before I went to jail, I was when I was a kid. I was a Auckland judo champion, so I did judo as a junior, and I won the under 9 stone championship when I was about 12 or 13 or something. And then when I was in jail, when I was at university, I was exercising fairly regularly, but not entering any races. But I was doing a bit of running, and then I was doing karate for about 4 years. I got a first dan with the Chidokan Club, and won the Auckland University Championship. sparring championship and kata. So I was always involved. And then when I went to jail in Mount Eden, when I was on remand, I used to run around the yard every day, which was unusual in that. So we're only out for 2 hours a day. We're out for 4 hours a day out of our cells, and I used to go for runs around the yard.
How big was the yard?
Not very big.
What do you reckon, like 100 metres?
About 20 laps to the mile,
okay.
I think it was, something like that. Yeah.
Oh, good on you. Well, you're looking great. I think that's the key, eh? You got to keep moving.
Well, you got to keep. You can get old pretty quick if you don't.
Well, let's go all the way back. So the Greg Newbold story, alcoholic mum, dad left when you were 11.
Yeah.
What impact did that have on you? Were you rebellious? Did you have a rebellious streak before then, or was that sort of was that a turning point for you?
It pretty well. I think I became more and more rebellious around the time my balls dropped. Around the time I reached puberty. You know, I was actually a very, very shy young boy, and I was nervous of other people and so on until my balls dropped. And then when I started reaching puberty, the testosterone, I think, kicked in, and I became a lot more self-confident. And another thing that made me self-confident was the judo. When I found that I could win fights, and that gave me a lot of confidence, because it's important to a young boy to be sort of masculine and so on. And I was good at judo. And so that really kicked in around the same time, and I started becoming confident in myself.
You just know that no one's going to bully you.
Yeah, you can still be bullied. I mean, it doesn't make you the God's gift of fighting, but it gives you some confidence in yourself and ability to handle situations.
Do you remember your first introduction to drugs?
Yeah.
When and where?
It was when I was in the fire service, I might have still been at school. Was sooner, around that time anyway, and we were, because this is the hippie era, so everyone was trying to get hold of marijuana, because this was the era, this is when the Haight-Ashbury scene was going on, and there was lots and lots of songs about, let's go to San Francisco, flowers in your hair, and we all knew they were all smoking dope. So smoking dope was the cool thing to do, and to have marijuana was made you a cool guy. And so I really wanted to get hold of some marijuana, some dope, smoking dope, and I managed to get some off the High Revving Tongues, actually.
Oh, the band.
Yeah, the band called the High Revving Tongues, and they had some marijuana, and I was able to buy some off them. And
is it okay for you to be telling the story? Are you snitching? They're not going to send heavies out to get you.
Well, that's where I got my first. Then we went to Australia, after my first year at university, and so it would have been when I was in the fire brigade. There was a guy called Mo at Rangitoto College who had access to marijuana, but no one else could. You couldn't get it. Marijuana was real hard to get in those days.
Was it really?
Oh yeah, shit, yeah.
So easy to grow.
I'm talking about 1969. It was very hard to get in New Zealand then. Only a few people. You had to be on the in crowd. Right. Tommy Adderley had some. He was a singer, and the people in the band scene could get it, but you had to be super cool, to get that. But then. So I started smoking dope, and then, of course, ever since I was first read about the dangers of drugs and how bad they were when I was at intermediate school, that made me want something. I thought, that's for me.
The propaganda didn't work.
No, we had the opposite. I thought, if it's bad, I want some.
Because you probably got you're probably at that age where you got the tail end of that whole reefer madness era.
Yeah.
Where you take this and you turn into a madman.
Yeah, that's right. It was right. That myth was just being blown. It had been blown by in the mid-'60s really, because LSD was still legal in the United States too until about 1968. Wow. And 1967 it was the Summer of Love. That's when that was a whole celebration of LSD just before it was about to come in as an illegal substance. Yeah. And so I wanted some acid as well. And I had my first trip when I was at university, first year at university. California sunshine it was. And that was coming over from Augustus Owsley Stanley, who was producing all the acid for the hippies in California, and that was being imported to New Zealand as well, which was written about by Tom Wolfe in his book, The Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. And that was about Stanley and his drugs. And so everyone was using acid because it was the mind-expanding drug. It was an enlightening drug, and Timothy Leary, of course, he on the East Coast, and Ken Kesey on the West Coast were big in promoting the acid culture. And in order to be cool, you had to use acid. And that got replaced soon after by the hard drugs in the Haight-Ashbury era, and also in New Zealand as well.
But the punishments, even for personal use back then, were so steep. That didn't put you off? That didn't deter you at all?
No, I didn't care. No one thinks they're going to get caught anyway, and everyone was using it, and you had to be cool, and you could get lots of girlfriends.
And what about heroin? When did a heroin enter your life? And what did it bring to your life that was missing?
Oh, nothing. Didn't miss. It just added something, heroin, because it's such a lovely drug.
What's it like?
Oh, it's fantastic.
Because I've it's
good. I mean, anyone who's had morphine in a hospital will have some idea, but they only give you really light doses in the hospitals. But no, heroin's like morphine. Diacetyl morphine, in fact, is what heroin is. It's just a refined form of morphine, which is refined. And morphine's a refined form of opium. Which comes from, and codeine's another refined form of opium. They all come from, they're all opiates. They come from the opiate, from the opium poppy. But so heroin was, I wanted to try some smack as soon as I could, and it was only when I started selling marijuana that I managed to get into that scene. Because what happened was that initially the heroin and the marijuana and the LSD was being used by the hippies. It was used by the university sector and by that circle. The criminals were not involved in it at that stage. But once the criminals started getting involved in it, as inevitably they would, because, I was selling marijuana out at the Westfield Freezing Works as well. That's where I started off my dealing with my mate Mary Chris. We were both working during the holiday, with my holidays, the university holidays, and I was selling. Well, all the Maoris from Hellaby's and the Maoris at Westfield, they all wanted to try this new drug, marijuana. And so that drug-using thing spread from the middle-class intellectual group into the working classes, and also the lumpen proletariat, the criminal classes, and they all started using as well. And Terry Clarke was part of that because he got out of jail after serving his 5-year sentence, and I think it was 1974, something like that. And he started selling marijuana and then importing marijuana from Thailand, and then getting cheap heroin and importing that in large amounts. But at that same time, a lot of the criminals were burgling chemist shops, which had really low security in those days, and they were getting whole bags full of morphine, pharmaceutical cocaine, Omnipon, and opioids, Omnipon, what are the other drugs? I can't remember some of them now, but they were all painkillers. Pethidine, they were using all that, and so they started shooting up the hard drugs, and then that started creeping into the middle class guys as well.
Did you start by smoking it off foil, or did you start by injecting straight away?
Heroin.
Yeah.
My first taste was morphine intravenous. Yeah.
Right. See, I think that would put most people off. Like, no one likes needles.
Yeah, I didn't mind them.
So, but you're a smart young man at the time. Like, you're obviously rebelling against something, but you were an anthropology student, and you went from that to heroin dealer in a alarmingly short period of time. Like, how does that transition happen? Does it creep up on you, or what?
Well, I always like excitement, and I've always been a risk taker.
You just bored easily,
and I was getting bored. Yeah, I was getting. The academic life was great, and I was doing, I did a paper called The Sociology of Deviance, and I thought, I don't want to just study it, I want to be it. So I started going down to Queen Street, to the Queen's Ferry, where the crooks were hanging out. A lot of crims used to hang around, knockabouts used to hang around the Queen's Ferry and the Occidental, 2 pubs in Vulcan Lane. And I met up with Maori Chris there.
What nationality was he?
In Maori.
Oh, yeah. Just making sure.
Yeah.
It's a great nickname.
Yeah. And there was a bloke called Twiggy and a bunch of, who was a skinny junkie. And I started dealing with Chris, dealing marijuana, Buddhist sticks. They were coming in there in bulk from Thailand. And $10 for a stick, and that stuff was so potent. A match head would get you stoned. It was really good gear.
Oh, yeah, because $10 back then was a lot of money. But you buy one of those sticks and it would last you like how many hits?
Oh.
Like a week?
Oh, yeah. It depends on how much you use. But you didn't need much. But you could roll up what they call a very skinny joint called a racehorse and smoke it like that. But in jail, because we had to conserve it, we used to just make pipes out of a toilet roll and cut a little hole in it and then put a foil top up with holes in it and just smoke like that, like a bong, and smoke it. And honestly, just a little match head of that stuff could get you sky high. It was really good.
You mentioned a couple of answers ago, you mentioned Terry Clarke, who's probably better known as Mr. Asia, maybe the most infamous New Zealand drug dealer of all time. What was he like? Would you consider him a mate?
Well, we were friendly and he liked me,
Was he intimidating or?
No, not at all. No. He was only a little guy. They called him, when he was in Witoko, they called him Sinbad because he looked like Sinbad the sailor. And then his short name was Sin. They called him Sin, which he was. Sinful, But, Terry was he was a cold, calculating person, but I got on well with him. But he would kill you. He would kill you if you knocked on him, if you crossed him, but he wasn't a big guy.
Did he have big aspirations at that time?
Oh, big, yeah. Yeah, he was, even when he was in Mount Eden, well, that's where I met him, He knew of me through Doug Wilson, because that's who I was getting my heroin off. It was 90% pure heroin, number 4 grade heroin. The top grade heroin, pure white powder, was very, very good heroin. You only need a little, like about the size of a match head in a syringe. And that was the danger of it. It was easy to OD on. So that's why when I was selling, I always gave my customers a little free taste to show them how much they needed. Don't use any more, you'll go over. But Terry, he was selling this very, very good smack, and I was getting it through Doug Wilson, who was a law student at Auckland University, and he was working with Terry. And he was an intelligent guy. He'd already done a jail sentence for selling LSD prior to that, but he was doing a law degree and he was selling smack. And it was through Doug that I got onto that really good smack, Did
you ever watch the very popular Underbelly series?
I watched some of it, yeah.
What did you make of that? In particular, the one that's based around Mr. Asia.
Yeah, well, I only saw a couple of episodes, so I didn't really form an opinion.
Right.
But I did see a couple of them, but it wasn't something I was that interested in, really, because I knew the real story, so I didn't really want to watch it.
Oh, so you think it's a great work of fiction.
Yeah.
You still talk, it's been like 45, 50 years, whatever it is, since you've last had heroin. You still talk about it quite romantically, don't you?
Well, I did. I was using it. It wasn't 50 years ago that I first had a ping. I used to use a bit of smack now and then, right through while I was using my writing my PhD, I was using hammer. And from time to time when I was lecturing, I used to have a ping as well, have a little blast for old time's sake. And also, I tell you, I also, when I was teaching criminology and I was giving lectures on drug use and so on, I was making sure that any new drug that was around, I got hold of it and used it, So I used a bit of ecstasy, I used a bit of methamphetamine, and all the drugs that were around, I would always make sure I had a go so that I knew what I was talking about,
What did you like of the more recent drugs?
Methamphetamine's pretty good.
Is it?
Yeah.
In what way?
Oh, it's a great aphrodisiac. It's the only reason I ever used to use it, in fact, was as an aphrodisiac, because it knocks you around a fair bit, but you can have a good night of sex on it. And men and women acts the same way, so, you can have a good
Just your poor wife. She must be like, Greg's on the glass Barbie again.
Oh, no, I never do. Since I got married, my wife is a total teetotaler. She would just freak out. She would have nothing to do with it, No, I stopped using that probably about the time I met my wife, actually. Yeah.
What out of recreational drugs are incredibly popular now? Like you go to a festival or something, and there's very few people drinking alcohol. The drugs. What did you like? Have you tried ketamine?
Yeah.
Ketamine, ecstasy.
Yeah, I've had ketamine, ecstasy. I had ketamine when I broke my leg. The ambulance driver gave me a shot of intravenous ketamine, but I'd tried it once before as a pill, and it blew my bloody brains out. I didn't actually like it much. But it was quite good when I broke my hip, because you got the pain. It's really effective at reducing severe pain. Yeah.
And ecstasy, MDMA?
Yeah, it's a really good drug, MDMA. I really like that drug. But I don't use any drugs now. But I've grown out of it, But MDMA, ecstasy's. Well, we used to say it should be compulsory. It makes you so happy.
Yeah, how can that be a bad thing?
And it doesn't have really bad side effects either. The next day you feel a little bit washed out because your endorphins get used up, but it only lasts a day. It's not really. You don't have a real bad hangover on ecstasy. It's a pretty good drug, really.
So, chapter 6 of your book is called Busted. I've got a line from that. In 1975, I was arrested and sent to jail. That was my lucky break.
Yeah, it really was. Well, because I was using heroin more and more often. Heroin will grab you. I'm not an addictive kind of a person. It's very hard to get me addicted, but I could have got addicted to heroin because it's automatically addictive. Whereas methamphetamine, MDMA, gambling, alcohol, they're not automatically addictive. But cigarettes are, and so is heroin and morphine. They're automatically addictive. They're physically addictive as opposed to being psychologically addictive. And I was going to get hooked on heroin because I started using it. By the time I got busted, I was using it 5 nights a week. I was psychologically addicted to it, and a physical addiction would have followed, because you get to the point. It's like being in love. It's very much the same feeling as being in love, and that is you feel like you can't be happy without it, and that's a bad way to feel. and love is a form of addiction as well, you know, where you become addicted to some woman.
How vividly do you remember that bust?
Oh, pretty clearly, you know, that warm glow that you get, and especially if you mix it with a bit of cocaine, which is called a speedball. I mean, that's just an amazing feeling, because the speedball gives you a mighty rush, and followed by the mellow stone and the warm feeling like you've been bathed in oil, you know. It's a lovely feeling, and that's what gets you. And you think when you first use smack, you know, oh, that was pretty good, that was lovely. And then the more you use it, the more you like it, and the more you crave for that feeling. And after the first time you use it, you think, oh, well, I can take it or leave it. What are they talking about? You know, right? But then you two or three times. It's like a woman. You know, you go out with her and you, oh, she's pretty nice. I quite like her. But you can fall in love with her over a period of weeks, and heroin's a bit like that. And so in the end you become addicted to it, and that's where I was headed with the heroin in 1975. And when I got busted, that broke the chain, you know.
Yeah, so you got busted maybe a kilometre from here, a place in Ponsonby.
Yeah, Leighton Street.
Yeah,
number 6 Leighton Street.
What happened that day?
Well, what had happened was that I had been approached by a guy called Lugsy Lee and another guy called Lee Cricket, who's now dead from an overdose. And Lee was one of my customers. And he came round to my place one day with Lugsy, who I knew of by reputation, but I didn't know him personally. And they said they wanted to, can I get them an ounce of smack? Or it might have been a couple of ounces. And I went round to Doug's place, because he was selling, and I said, you know, can you get me an ounce? And he said, yeah. So I paid him $1,000 for it, and I told Lugsy and Lee that they could have it for $1,100. So I didn't normally deal in ounces, you know. I was only dealing $30 caps. That's what I was dealing with. So on this occasion, it was an exception. And so they went away to do the deal, and then came back to me about an hour and a half later when I was starting to get nervous. And I said, have you got the money? And they says, no, we haven't. The deal hasn't been done yet. And I said, well, where's the smack? And he said, well, it's around at Leighton Street at Geddy's place. And I knew of Geddy by reputation as well. He was a German guy. And he was a junkie. And I thought, oh, for fuck's, you know, bloody, they were using my shit. And Geddy will be hooking into it while you're there. And I thought, well, I'm going to go round there, and they can either do the deal or I'll take the smack away with me, you know. So I went round there with Lugsy, and the deal was going to be done. It's just about going to be done. And so and Geddy by that time had taken over it, and he was testing it, you know. And I thought, oh yeah, yeah. And so he was stoned, and then suddenly the doors all exploded and the coppers was running through the place. They had this place totally staked out. There was coppers down the road pretending to paint houses. They were up ladders dressed in overalls pretending to paint houses. There was a van down the street with people underneath it trying to fix the engine, and they were coppers as well. There were a whole bunch of coppers, and there was a van full of coppers. There was must have been about 15 of them, because they thought it was a major bust. They thought I was a big dealer. And so the Panaho, who was the detective who'd set the whole thing up, thought that he was going to be busting a Mr. Big of Auckland. All they got
just
was
little
me.
Old Greg.
All they got was me.
Well, what are those first few days like after losing your freedom?
Oh, terrible. I felt, my whole life exploded, or imploded. My whole life, especially when I got busted. Oh, Christ. And then going into Mount Eden Prison, which is, an old Victorian jail. First, it was designed in the 1880s on the old British jail system, the old prison, the old British model. And... it was like stepping back in time, going into the Mount with the echoing doors and the smell of wax and disinfectant. That was the smell you got inside there, wax and disinfectant. And the walls were made of stone and the floors were made of stone and
just miserable.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was real. A real, I'd been living in Auckland all my life, and I'd never known that they had this dungeon. I'd driven past Mount Eden, but all you see is the walls and the ramparts, But inside, it really was like an old dungeon.
How long does it take to accept and adapt, and just be like, okay, this is my new normal?
Probably. Well, you do it by stages. It doesn't sort of happen. It just gradually grows on you. I'd say by after 3 years, you're fully prisonised. You're fully institutionalised after 3 years. But after 3 months, you've pretty much come to accept the routine, and then you gradually slip into the existing way of thinking.
So that line I read before, I was arrested and sent to jail, that was my lucky break. How long did it take you to think it was a lucky break?
Or I wasn't until I got out of it. I wasn't very happy, I can tell you.
No.
When of course when I was on remand, I was on remanded in custody for 5 months. Until you tried and sentenced, you still think there's a good chance I'm going to get out, because they didn't actually have a lot of evidence on me. They didn't have a lot of evidence on me.
So there's still hope.
I was convicted on that false evidence by that phantom detective. They got the detective who lied through his teeth. That was what I was convicted on.
Yeah.
Well, as I say in the book, I don't particularly hold it against them. I don't like coppers who lie. I mean, they're supposed to be upholding the law. They're not allowed to break the law. You're not allowed to break the law to enforce the law, but that's what they did. And I think the judge was pretty much in it as well. They're all part of the whole charade. But I got, and in the end I dropped my appeal because I was just fed up with being in limbo, and so I accepted that I was going to do my lagging and get out and try and make the best of it.
So that moment that you're standing in court in the dock and you get sentenced to 7.5 years prison.
Yeah.
Are your parents both there? Who's there?
Yeah, they were there.
Fuck, what's that like?
Well, getting sentenced wasn't so bad because I knew how long I was going to get pretty much from what other people had been getting. But with the real bad moment was the conviction. Guilty. When it's guilty, I just felt like the blood had drained out of my body because there was all hope gone. I knew then, at that moment, how long I was going to get. I knew I was going to get 6 to 8 years, and I got 7.5. So I knew, and I was only 23. Just turned 24 by that stage. I knew my 30s were gone. When you're 24, 30 seems old, and so you think you're going to be you're in forever. You can't see the end of it, and Mum and Dad were there, and they said my face drained. I went white, and we staggered down the spiral staircase with the handcuffs on, and down the stairs we went to the holding room to go back to prison. And that's when you realise this is real. It's really going to happen, and you're going to have to make some adjustments.
That ride in the van, like, do you cry? How are you feeling?
Nah, I didn't cry. No. But you do feel like pretty stink, you know. You feel pretty just wiped out, you know. This is it. This is real.
How was your mental health? Did you ever contemplate taking your own life at that point?
No, I wasn't. It was the time when I came closest to being broken was when I was in classification at Paremoremo prison. That was we went out to Parry the next day, and the environment in class was so bad. There was so much tension in that cell block, and we were locked up 23. You see, while I was on remand, I was locked up 20 hours a day. In class, you're locked up 20 hours a day. And when you're out, there's so much tension. There's young buggers young ball busters trying to make names for them and standing over people, and there was always that tension. And that really got to my head. It really gets to your head when you've got nothing to do but think and listen to people being abused and stood over and being bullied around. And it didn't happen to me, but, you know, it was just a horrible, horrible, horrible environment. And it was then that I felt I was going to lose the plot, and I was going to break. That's when I went to the chief officer, to John Jackson. Sid Ward, I think it was. He was the deputy superintendent. Yeah, it was. I went to Sid Ward, and both him, John Jackson, who was the chief officer, no, he was the first officer, and deputy superintendent Sid Ward, they knew exactly what I was talking about. You know, I mean, they really were experienced prison officers. And Sid Ward said to me, righto, and I told him exactly what was happening in my brain. He said, all right. He said, I'll send you over. You could go over to A Block tomorrow. Just like that. Just like that. And, you know, when he said I could get it, he said, where do you want to? I said, I want to go anywhere. I want to get out of class. You know, put me in the pound. Put me in solitary. I can't handle it anymore. So they put me over and suddenly it all disappeared, you know. All the stress, everything just disappeared in an instant. Wow. You know, and I went over to A Block, and Pete Atkinson, my mate, who's still my very good mate, met me. He came over to me and said, you know, where are you from? And he gave me that name, Dream Dealer. And
what did that mean?
Dream Dealer, selling powdered dreams. You know, Morpheus is that. Morphine comes from the god of Morpheus, the Greek god of dreams, and heroin is refined morphine. That's why he called me the powdered dream dealer. Yeah.
That's a great nickname. And you were still using in jail. You tell a story in there about there's a syringe that was just kept in like a sports shoe that everyone used, and everyone got hepatitis.
The A Block syringe.
That is disgusting.
Everybody got hepatitis. And we used to hide it down in the workshops, and it used to come up wrapped up in a piece of cloth hidden between the cheeks of Whoopi's ass. Honestly. And we'd wash it out in cold water. Rinse it out in cold water in the interest of hygiene.
Surely no high is worth that. Like, you're a smart guy. Surely there's some common sense that kicks in and say, do I want to get high? I like the feeling of it, but I know that the syringe has been in Whoopi's ass.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Unbelievable.
Well, you look at it, but you know, I was 24 and you're just
bored. You got time.
Bored. You're living for the moment, and you're part of that scene. And there was about 6 of us on the landing. There was 12 of us on the landing, and 6 of us were users, and then we all used to share that needle, and the needle itself was so big. It used to get a hook on it, you know. And it was called a hook, you know, because it's those syringes, those needles are really fine, and they're made of really soft metal, and you'd get a hook, and you stick it in, and pop, bang, and we'd pull it out and there'd be a hunk of flesh stuck on the end of it. Tiny, bloody hell.
You're lucky this is just a few years before the AIDS epidemic.
Yeah, we used to try and sharpen it up on the striker of a matchbox, try and sharpen it up and get rid of that burr, that little hook, and then sharpen it. Oh, God.
So when you're incarcerated, what does a good day look like and what does a bad day look like?
Oh, the bad days and good days are pretty much the same, really. A bad day would be if there'd been a fight in the block and there was tension and the block was splitting, siding up with one or other of the combatants. That was a bad day when you got tension in the block.
You just feel it in the air.
You feel it in the air, and everyone's tense and everyone's looking at each other and wondering who's going to be next, and how are we going to, what's going to happen, and the uncertainty going on, because there's only 48 men in the block, and you all know each other, and some of them are in for pretty violent crimes, and that's you get that might last 3 or 4 days, and then someone will offer a olive branch at someone else, and normally invite them in for a smoke, and smoke a joint together like a peace pipe, and suddenly the tension goes away and everyone's sort of laughing nervously, and things get back to normal. And that's a good day in jail, when there's no tension. Or when you got some dope and when you got some smacking. We had a good week that, when I got that, I think it was probably just about an ounce of heroin into how to. That was a good week. All of us all using for every night for a week. That was a good week.
Yeah, I think it's fairly strict now and quite hard to get any sort of contraband into the prisons. How was it done back then?
Much harder. In those days, we would smuggle out a half a cigar tube. Cigars come in those aluminium tubes. Yeah. We'd get hold of one of them, and maybe our visitor would bring in a cigar tube for us, and you'd stick it up your bum. In fact, what they'd bring in, you'd get your visitor to get a cigar tube and put all the dope inside the cigar tube, but you could only fit half of one up your rectum, because a whole cigar tube wouldn't fit all the way up the rectum because your rectum's got a bend in it, So you'd get it to cut the cigar tube in half and get the plastic cap in the end of it, and then fill it up with marijuana or pethidine or palfium or omnipom or whatever, those opiates, or LSD, and then they'd hand it to you in the visiting room, and then you'd have a hole cut in the side of in the crutch of your pants. We never wore underpants, and then you just slide it up your bum. You sit on the end. You had to sit on the end of the chair and slip it up your rectum that way, But you'd have your bum already greased up. You'd have to be already greased up, otherwise it wouldn't go up. And one occasion, I didn't have any Vaseline. And so I used deep heat. That was a mistake. I felt like I had a fucking poker stuck up my bum. A red hot poker.
Oh my God, these stories are wild. Yeah. You were quite. So you were in. He was in a different wing to you, but Dean Wickliffe, who's maybe done more time than any other living New Zealander. He was in Paremoremo at the same time as you in 1976, and he's one of the few people that has escaped. Even though he was in a different wing, like what happens when you're inside and something like that happens? Is it the talk of the whole building?
I'll tell you what, it was funny. It was funny as hell. What happened was, Dean was in D block in his first escape, and he got over the wall, and he managed to climb up the fence and over the fence. But what was funny about it was that the siren went off. The siren went off, and everybody, all the screws ran down the corridor to the sally port that leads to the end of the jail, to the exit of the jail. And as they all ran out, there was a divisional officer called Foster, who was the DO of classification, and Hanari Jews, who was doing 12 years for rape, who was a real comedian, a funny bastard. And Henry started running with the screws, and he ran, and Foster standing at the gate, and he's going, "No, you don't, no, you don't. No, you don't, Jews. No, you don't, Jews." And Henry's going, ducking either way like he was on the football field trying to get around. And it was just so funny. It was absolute hilarious. And Henry was pretending he was trying to run out with the screws. It was so funny. And old Foster, he was an old pommy guy, he was, Foster. He goes, "No, you don't, Jews. No, you don't. Oh, no, don't try that one, Jews." It was really funny.
So it seems like there's moments, there's moments of just pure joy and amongst the bleakness.
Yeah, it was. Henry was funny.
Yeah.
Henry was real funny.
And you did so much writing, eh? Like, you wrote thousands and thousands. You wrote prison diaries, and you wrote a thesis. You wrote thousands of pages while you're in there.
Yeah, I wrote about 1,000 words a day in my diary. They were foolscap, 100-leaf diaries, and I'd fill them up every few months. I ended up with probably 20. I think 20 volumes. Yeah.
So it's almost like there's two different versions of you. There's this guy that's addicted to the wild side, but then you've got this this sort of guide in you that lets you know you need to do something productive with your time.
Yeah, hell yeah. Because when I first went to jail, and I knew going to get out with a BA. I already had a BA, but a BA is not worth anything.
Bugger all,
and I get out. I'm going to get out at the age of 30, which I think is an old man in those days, of course. What am I going to do? My life's buggered. I'm finished. My whole life has ended. So I thought, in my first few weeks on remand, I started making plans. If I get convicted, what am I going to do? And so as soon as I got convicted, I started thinking, righto, I've got to try and do an MA in jail because I don't want to get out with just a BA. I've got to try and make something of this bloody... I knew I was going to do, of the 7.5, I knew I was going to do 5. And because in those days the parole system was different. You had to do 2/3, you see, of your sentence. So 5 years is 2/3 of 7.5. I knew I was going to do 5, give or take a month or so. And so I knew how long I was going to do, so I could plan out, and which is what you can't do now with the open parole system. You can't plan out how long you're going to do because you don't know, because you're going to come up for parole after 1/3. But anyway, I knew I was going to do 5, so I planned out and managed to get permission from Jack Hobson, who I'm eternally grateful for, for giving me full-time studies and allowing me to do something, to make something of my life. And if it hadn't been for Jack Hobson, the superintendent of Paremoremo Prison, a wonderful bloke, a terrific humanitarian, I would never have been able to do what I did, and I wouldn't have become a university professor. So I made those plans then. But I also like having a bit of fun. I compartmentalise my life. All work and no play makes Greg a dull boy.
What's it like being articulate and intelligent in jail? Is it easier or harder? Well,
that was interesting because when I first came in, I was still in that intellectual mode. And when I started debating like an academic. And the guys, the old hands there, they said, look, you've got to come down and get rid of that way of... And I used to write my letters like that too, academically. And
like a bit pompous or something.
You're sort of an academic, I don't know, the way they write and talk. And not pompous, but it's just the way they write and talk, because that's their culture. And so I had to start thinking like a ordinary person and writing like it. And it was Stan Rangi, who was a lifer up there, who said, look, and talked to me about, and I watched how they debated. I thought, yeah, that's the way to do it. And so I started writing and thinking, and as I'm talking now, I was in that academic world, but I'm not like in that anymore. I never have been since I got out. I've always been like I am now. And I started writing. I started writing my letters. I started practicing my writing by writing letters in a really basic way, and practicing my writing skills that way, and my debating skills. So, when you say what's it like being an academic, what it was like was that I was just an ordinary bloke in the jail, and no different from anyone else, but I was studying, and the inmates liked it. Well, respected it. They used to, when I was studying it during the day, they'd turn down their radios. And they'd bring me a cup of tea at smoko time, knock on just on my door. Excuse me, dream dealer, would you like a cup of tea? Thanks, mate. Yeah, sure. Yeah, mate. And they'd bring me in a cup of tea. And they'd keep their radios down and all that, so that I could study. They were fantastic, and the screws were amazing as well. The screws were the same. They knew I was studying, and they'd just come in. They'd knock on my door when they wanted to do a cell search. Oh, excuse me, Newbold. No, they'd call me Greg actually, because we're all on first name terms up there. We were first name terms with the screws, and they'd say, "Excuse me, Greg, mind if we have a look around?" I'd say, "Oh yeah, sure, mister. I'll just wait outside." And they'd, look around and lift my papers up, because my cell was a mess. There was papers strewn all over the place because I was writing my PhD, my MA, and then they'd say, or they'd sit down there. They'd just read my Playboy or something. They were really good. They were fantastic people, those screws. It was a wonderful environment, Paremoremo, in those days. It really was. There was a hell of a sense of community among the inmates, and the screws were always polite. It was always please and thank you, and we were please and thank you to the screws. It was great. We had tensions from time to time, but for the most part, it was a really, really benign environment. Yeah, it was great. It was a good place to live in, and everybody loved. It was
a new building at the time as well, wasn't it?
Pretty new. Yeah, it had been opened in 1969, so it was only a few years old, and it was the most modern. When it was built, it was the most modern penal institution in the world. It was most advanced, most secure. It was a really good jail, and guys didn't want to leave. I mean, it's maximum security. They didn't want to go to lower security because they wouldn't have such good conditions. The food was good. The food was really good because the inmates were part of this whole ethic. We've got to look after each other, so the inmates would cook good food, and the rations were good. It wasn't. Later on, they started cutting back on the food. The quality of food in prison now is crap compared to what it was in those days. We used to get bacon and eggs twice a week for breakfast. We got pudding, dessert every night, and the food was really good in Paremoremo, and it was the best. And they used to bake their own bread. Stan Rangi was the baker, and he used to beautiful bread, fresh, warm bread every day, fresh bread, because he'd be up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning making the bread for breakfast. Oh yeah, the food was really good.
Wow. Yeah, you completed a thesis in there on the social organisation of Paremoremo Prison that earned you first-class honours. What was the social organisation of that prison 50 years ago?
The social organisation of that prison was unique in the annals of maximum security. I never, in all of the readings that I did, and I read everything that was available about Prison Social Organisation, when I wrote that MA, it was 450 pages long. It was massive for an MA, massive. And I never come across another prison which was like Paremoremo. It was absolutely unique. And it was a jail where there was no hierarchy, zero hierarchy. Some people had more prestige than others if they were good touch players or good crash players or so on, but basically everyone was the same. Even the child molesters had equal status to everybody else in that jail. And that was part of the ethic of solidarity which the old inmates brought to the prison. And standing over was just not permitted. There was one young fella came in, he was a rapist, and he bashed up a guy called Tilsley, who was this child molester. And I can remember his name was Lance. And Lance had slapped around Tilsley. And you know what? One of the old guys, his name was John Apulsio Smith, he was a Tongan. He came up and he said, Lance, he said, don't you ever do that again. He said, if you ever touch that guy again, you are going to answer to me. Do you understand? You'll leave him alone. He's no different from you. You're a rapist, you know? And that was it. And that was the way it was. You just didn't do it. You didn't stand over people.
All right, so the mentality is like we're all crumbs.
We're all criminals. We're all equal and we're all living together, you know? And if you were a narc, it was a bit different. You know, the narcs, you couldn't narc. Everyone, like, you had to stand together. There was, on one occasion, I remember we were in we got our dinner, and someone said the meat's off. And I tasted it. There was nothing wrong with the meat. No, the meat's off. He throws his food in the bin. All right, we'll throw our food in the bin. We're sitting there thinking, we're not moving, the meat's off, we're throwing it. Hobson goes, all right. And he cooked it, we all got a new meal, sausages, it was sausages. And then we'd thrown our dessert out as well. We want a new dessert. Hobson, you're not getting a dessert. All right.
Another high-profile
and
inmate,
we all knew there was nothing wrong with the food, but we all had to stick together.
Right.
Yeah.
Different time, eh? Arthur Allan Thomas, a very, very high-profile New Zealander, wrongfully convicted of the killing of Harvey and Jeanette Crew.
Harvey and Jeanette Crew, yeah.
So you were mates with him. Your paths crossed.
Yeah. In A Block, I wasn't mates with Arthur, but it was only 48 of us in the block, and Arthur was older than the rest of us, you know, he was in his 40s. So he mixed with the older guys and we mixed with the younger guys and so on. So Arthur was a bit different, but he was always working on his case, you know. He'd be out in the yard walking up and down in his underwear, shaking his head, thinking, how did it happen? It wasn't until we got to How To that Arthur and I became good friends, because we were both in the fencing gang together, because he was a farmer and I was in the fencing gang, and me and Arthur got together and we started, because the gangs only have 8 men in them, you know, and we were both long-termers. And so we became friends there, and we used to have a lot of fun. Arthur had a good sense of humour too, and we'd be making these ridiculous patents, fencing patents, stupid ways of putting up fences, and we'd think it up at night and then come the next day to work and we'd be laughing and rolling about at some stupid idea we had for putting up a fence. But also, of course, Arthur was working on his case and he was writing these letters to Muldoon, because David Yallop had written the book Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, which cast serious doubt on the validity of the convictions of Arthur Thomas, because the cartridge case, which had been which came from Arthur's gun, which supposedly been used to kill the Crews, was planted by the police, and that was proven. And so David Yallop wrote this book, and suddenly the thing got momentum, and Robert Muldoon, who was the Prime Minister at the time, was sympathetic to Arthur's cause, and so Arthur used to write these letters to Muldoon, but he couldn't write very well. Arthur was only semi-literate. You know, he didn't use full stops. He didn't use capital letters. He was really could hardly write. And so what used to happen was that I used to write the letters out in good English. He'd give me the letters, I'd transcribe them into good English, and then he would rewrite them in his own hand and post them off to the Prime Minister. And then the Prime Minister used to give them to the news media, and they used to quite often get read out. Parts of them would be read out at night on the 6 o'clock news.
Wow.
And so, yeah, Arthur and I became good friends, and later on, after he got out, I went round and stayed at his place on his farm.
Mm.
And
did he get compensation?
Yes, he got $1 million.
Yeah, $1 million, yeah.
Yeah, which is a lot of money in those days. $1 million was enough to buy the best farm in one of the best farms in the Waikato.
Yeah. Jeez, I can't think of many things worse than being wrongly committed, especially of a heinous crime like that.
Yeah, especially. And he served 9 years before he was pardoned. He was given a judicial pardon. And we were working together on the fencing gang when he was picked up, and he'd been given a pardon by the Governor General, and he just disappeared. Wow. By the time we got back, he was gone.
So you did join a gang in jail, a fencing gang?
Yeah, fencing gang. Yeah.
You're a gang member.
Yeah. And the forestry gang. I was in all the gangs. I was in gang one.
You're a gang slut.
Yeah.
What were the 5 years incarcerated? What were the biggest lessons about yourself, if anything?
I changed a lot.
Did you?
I changed a lot. I was a different person when I got out to what I was when I went in, because I was fully criminalised. I was fully criminalised when I got out. I was fully committed to the criminal ethic, to the point that I hated cops. I hated cops. I hated uniforms. I hated bus conductors. I hated anyone wearing a uniform. It was sort of drilled into us in jail by the inmate social code that the worst, filthiest thing you could ever be called is to be called a policeman. That they were the scum of the earth, you know. And I had a real chip on my shoulder when I got out, in that sense. But when I started writing my PhD, working on my PhD, and I started interviewing prison officers. Because it was on the history of the maximum security prison. So I was interviewing prison officers that had been prison officers in the 50s and 40s. It was in the post-war period I focused on. I got to talk to a lot of guys, and I realised that, you know, you build up this image of this evil person. It's like you'd be the same if you were a terrorist, really. I suppose the IRA had that mentality as well. You develop it. And coppers have the same mentality about criminals. You see, it's them and us. And then I realised, well, you know, they're just actually human beings like us. And
doing a job.
And doing their jobs and then I got to know quite a few cops through running marathons, because there's quite a few cops running marathons. Oh, they're not bad blokes after all, you know. And now, of course, I get on really well with the police, and you know, Greg O'Connor became a friend of mine. He was the secretary of the Police Association. We became friends, and so I changed as well when I got out. But when I first got out, I was pretty bloody down a hole, you know. I was really down a hole.
Yeah, there's a saying that most people are hard not to like up close, and I suppose that applies to everyone, police or other inmates, whatever. You know, you get to know someone, and
you get to know someone. Yeah, I was really quite sympathetic. You know, because I knew a lot of guys who'd done some pretty horrible things in jail. Because Paremoremo maximum security prison, you got the worst criminals in the country, and I found that some of them had been convicted of horrible crimes, and yet they were actually pretty nice people on a personal basis. Yeah, so, and I became good friends with some of them. And
I mean, there's some bad people in there, but if you judge any of us on our worst day, like,
yeah, well, that's
you're not
right.
going to like anyone.
You can't be defined. Yeah, you can't be defined by the worst thing you ever did.
No.
You know, but at the same time, what I've found too is that when you're in jail, because you're in a microscope, and you're living you're under a microscope. You're living in a microcosm, and everybody knows that everyone else is watching what you're doing. So people tend to be on their best behaviour. Even people who are pretty psychologically messed up tend to be on their best behaviour in jail, and you get to see the best side of them because we were living in this really benign community where it was really important to be honest. It was really important to be generous. It was really important to be fair and to be seen that way by the others, because there's only 48 of you in the block. And your reputation is based on what everyone else is saying about you. And so everyone's trying to be liked. You don't want to be disliked in that kind of an environment. But when I got out, I found that a lot of the guys weren't the same as what they were when they were in prison. When you've got anonymity, a weak character, and drugs and alcohol involved, suddenly they would revert back to what they were before. So it was quite a lesson, actually. I learned a lot about human nature, actually, when I was in jail. I learned a hell of a lot. You know,
I suppose you have to become an expert at reading people for survival.
Yeah, you do. You really do. You really become intimately involved with other people's personalities, you know. And there was a guy called Pani Waitai who'd done a bad thing. He was a lifer, and he'd escaped from prison and killed two old people while he was escaped. Killed 2 old people in New Plymouth. And yet, in jail, he was a real nice guy, Pani. He was disturbed, really badly disturbed. But he'd sit with me in my cell. He'd come into my cell, and he'd just sit in my cell. And then he'd start talking. And then he'd stop talking, and he'd go off into the stream. And then he'd start talking again. He might have stopped talking for a minute, and then he'd go back talking to what he was talking. And he's talking about really deep stuff that was going on in his head. And I really liked Pani. He was a nice bloke, but he did have some deep shit going on in his brain, you know. But some really interesting.
Yeah.
There was a guy called Dave Wharopori who was a bully at Mount Eden. He ended up being sent up to Paremoremo because he stabbed a bloke called Randall in the movie. He stabbed and ripped his guts open with a knife, and from behind, coming over the top and ripped them up. And he came into Paremoremo, and he started mouthing off and blah, 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 you know, just like he did. And, you know, the guys said, the Maoris didn't like him, you know, because he was loud. Because the thing about Paremoremo, you don't be loud. And you don't look at other people either. You don't stare at people or look at them, and you don't look in people's cells. You look at the ground all the time when you're walking around. You always look at the ground. And he was strutting about, and I tell them what the Maoris hated him. And he was a good athlete too, this guy. But Maoris hated him, and he was mouthing off, talking loud in the dining room. And then the Maoris used to sit at one table, and he wasn't among them. He was at another table in the dining room. And then this little guy, little Tuhoi, a guy called Bobby Pofare, and Bobby was much smaller than him, but he sat at the Maoris table, and he said, hey, fuck up your wonk, fuck up your fucking egg, you know. And Dave looked over, and there's this little guy abusing him, you know. And then he looked at all the Maoris who were just sitting there looking at him. and he just shut up. And he sat down, and he never talked loud again. Never talked loud again. And he used to come up to me because they started thieving from his cell as well, which was something you don't do in Paremoremo. Peter, being a Peter thief, they call it. You don't tea leaf from people's cells, but they used to thieve from his cell, which is the greatest insult. And Dave used to come up because he knew that no one would thieve off me, and he used to leave his valuables in my cell. Can you look after my stuff for me, mate? Yeah, sure. And then he'd come up after work and pick up his soap and his shampoo and stuff like that, shaving gear, his toothbrush, and that, So and you said to me, because he used to beat people up for fun on the outside. On the outside, he used to pull up. Him and his mate used to pull up again to a car beside the lights, and they'd get out and rob the guy. And Dave said to me, he used to bash up. He used to bash up the driver while the other guy did the thieving because he loved bashing people up. And he come to me after this incident, and he sat down with me and he said, I used to love violence. He said, but I don't like it anymore. That's what he said, because he suddenly found he was on the other side of it. I don't like it anymore.
Yeah, develop some empathy.
I don't think it's a go anymore. That's what he said.
And what was the hardest part of rebuilding life with a serious conviction? So 5 years. Oh, first of all, what was the day like? Do you remember the day you got out? Are you counting down the days to release?
Oh, yeah, hell yeah. Yeah, the day I got out, man.
Is that a great day?
Yeah, it was a great day, all right. I said goodbye to all my friends in the jail. They called me over they unlocked me early because I had to catch the 7:30 bus to Auckland, and I got out in July, so it was winter time. I went up to work parole, you see. Work parole. That was my day out, my day of release, really, when I went to work parole at Mount Eden. Karariki Avenue, there was a work parole hostel. And I just said goodbye to everyone, knocked on their cell doors and said goodbye. It was dark. And they called me over Newbold to the guard room. And I went over to the guard room and they gave me my old kit, and I got all my prison kit off and put on my all outdated clothes. All the fashions had changed. I was wearing bell-bottoms, platform shoes, wide lapel jacket, the paisley shirt,
Yeah, 1975 clothes, but it's 1980 by this point.
Yeah, that's right. That had changed.
Different decade.
Yeah, different. The clothes were all different. And got in my old gear and got on the bus. They drove me down to Turangi to get the 7:30 bus to Auckland. It was a 4-hour trip. I arrived there at 11:30. Got off and I ran up Queen Street. And to my dad's place, and he took me to the up to Mount Eden, and we had lunch on the top of Mount Eden, and then took me around to the work parole hostel in Kakari Ave in Mount Eden, and I met Des Burgess, who was the warden of the pre-release hostel, and his wife, and he explained the way things worked, and we were allowed out. I was allowed to go to work every day. I had a job at Auckland University doing research on prisoners' rights under a government scheme called the PEP scheme, where the government subsidised an employer to give people who had just got out of jail or had been out of work to give them a job, and I was on that scheme, and then the next day I went into the university, and the law faculty was there, and Bernie Brown, who was a professor of law there, gave me an office, and he looked after me. He'd worked on my appeal, actually, back 5 years before, Bernie. And I started doing this work because I was in jail after I finished my MA, and I got moved down to... I got first class honours for my MA, and I got moved down to Hautu out of Paremoremo after I'd finished my thesis, and I did study in criminal law as an external student, and I came top of the class.
Wow.
And a class of about 300. And Bernie was teaching that class, so he knew who I was, and he helped me get my PhD scholarship reinstated and so on, which had lapsed while I was in jail. And then I was doing a paper called Advanced Criminal Law as well, and so I was able to attend classes for the last part of the course. And me and a guy called Barry Matthews, who ended up being the Deputy Commissioner of Police, we were top of that class.
Wow.
And so I was studying, and as well as doing this research on prisoners' rights. And so I was attending classes, which was just exciting as hell, being back at university and attending law classes. And Mary Kennedy was teaching in that class, and I became friends with her. And Bill Hodge, who was also a law professor, and he got me out running marathons. And so, it was just it's so exciting. I mean, it was just one of the most exciting times of my life, and one of the happiest times of my life.
Why, just because you had a new appreciation of freedom? Or?
Yeah. Oh, I was able to go running instead of at How-To. We used to run around the football field, and I was able to run without running in a circle. So Bill and I used to go out running and run into the university, or we'd do a big circuit around Mount Eden or out round St Heliers, do 20, we used to sometimes do 20, 30k runs in the morning, or else we'd go up the Waitakaries.
Yeah, the old Arthur Lydiard block.
Yeah. And we do those big runs up a mountain road from Titirangi down into the valley and up Mountain Road, or up Opanuku Road, and back along the Summit Road back to Titirangi, me and Bill.
Yeah.
And so that was great. That was while I was doing my still on work parole, and then I got I fronted the parole board, and I was I released a week before my statutory release date. They gave me a week. And I'd done an MA with first class honours while I was in jail. So my reward for that was a week off my sentence.
Did you're running. We talked about this before we started the podcast. You were bloody good. You did a 2:52 marathon, which is that's a fantastic time. You did an Ironman as well, full Ironman.
Yeah, I did an Ironman. I did the Ironman in 1989. That was after I'd finished my PhD and I was working at Canterbury University. I did a few marathons with Bill. My first marathon was in fact the Wirri Marathon, which was a week after my release date. My release date was the 30th of October, 1980. And the Wirri Marathon, I think, was a week after that. And I'd been training with Bill. And so I did that, and I ran it in 3 hours and 11 seconds.
Got it.
Yeah. But
any marathoner will know how devastating that is.
Yeah. Well, as I said, telling you before, I would have broken the 3 hours by a couple of seconds had my shoelace not come undone, and no excuses. But I had to bend over and do my shoelace up, and I reckon that took 11 seconds, or maybe 12.
And was it hard for? Did your conviction sort of hold you back in any way? Like the way you explained it, it seems like you seamlessly got back to your academic life. But there's people out there that must be like once a crook, always a crook, or they're wary of you, or they struggle to give you a second chance.
I had none of that.
Really?
No.
Wow.
People went out of their way to help me.
Why so?
They went out of their way to help me. Oh, I think I've got an honest face.
Yeah.
No, but honestly, I'm a pretty sincere kind of a bloke. And people took me for what I was, took me at face value, And I was careful not to let people down, really, because I was faithful to Bill and I was faithful to Bernie, and people, no one really, I was never aware of any stigma at all. And when I was later on, much later in my life, when I was in the Salisbury Street Foundation at Christchurch, dealing with long-term criminals who'd come to this halfway house that I was on the board of trustees, and we were dealing with them and getting them jobs. I found that was common actually in New Zealand. I'm really bloody impressed with New Zealanders in that respect, because they'll always give a bloke a fair chance. They'll always give a guy the benefit of the doubt, and some of them get let down. But I found that generally New Zealanders will give a man a fair go. They'll give you a chance, and I found that more often than the other, they'll go out of their way to help you if you've just got out of jail and you're honest about things. Don't lie to them. Yeah. People are pretty bloody fair, not like the United States at all, where there's huge stigma.
Right.
If you've got out of jail, and I've been to the States quite a few times. I can't go there now since 9/11, but I've been to the States over a dozen times to conferences where I've given papers at the big conferences over there, and they're totally different attitude over there to criminals. There's a real stigma, to the point where I was once at the Hyatt, staying at the Hyatt in Chicago or somewhere, and there was a group of criminals, ex-criminals, had got together and they were doing work on the hotel as a company that was putting in the drywalls. And you know what? There were people outside pamphleting the hotel. Dear Hyatt customer, did you know that the company that's installing drywalls into this hotel are criminals? Do you feel safe in this hotel knowing that criminals are working in this hotel? True. And there was the picture with the message of a rat holding a bag of money. And that was true. I couldn't believe it. They were pamphleting the bloody hotel, and these guys were trying to make a go of their lives. Yeah. Oh boy, I thought that would never happen in New Zealand.
Wow.
That would never happen. You'd be on the news and you'd be pilloried for it.
So speaking of being on the news, so you were at the Canterbury University for 32 years as a criminologist, and you were like the go-to guy on the news. Every time there was a story about law and order in New Zealand, you would see your ugly mug on the 6 o'clock news. Yeah, you became quite famous, I guess, like the go-to guy.
I became the leading, really the leading spokesperson on the leading lay spokesperson, expert opinion on crime and prisons.
What is a criminologist? What does that mean?
Well, it's got different fields. Some criminologists come from the law. It's not a discipline on its own right, not like sociology or psychology, but some come from the law profession. Some come from sociology, which I do, and some are psychology, and they deal with different. The legal criminologists are mainly involved with the law and the law of crime. So psychologists are mainly deal with the psychology of crime and crime of individuals, and what makes someone a criminal and what makes them, how you deal with rehabilitating people and so on. And a sociologist deals with the phenomenon, crime as a social phenomenon. And so you mainly deal with crime trends, the effects of criminal justice policy on trends of crime. And all my work was historical stuff on the evolution of the criminal justice system, the evolution of prisons, and also how the profiles of crime have changed over the years and what's caused those changes. For example, why did rape become so heavily penalised in the late 70s and 80s? Well, the feminist movement had a lot to do with that, with raising the profile, raising public consciousness about rape, and that resulted in changes in the law, changes in criminal justice policy, changes in attitude towards sexual violation. And you can do the same with drug crime, for example. Drug crime was not a big issue in New Zealand until the 1970s. With the hippie movement, and you can trace that back to the hippie movement. You can trace the feminist campaigns back to the Vietnam War and the peace movement, and then out of the peace movement came the Black Liberation movement, and out of the Black Liberation movement came the Women's Liberation movement, and out of the Women's Liberation movement came rape consciousness. And one of my books, Crime, Law and Justice in New Zealand, is about that.
Mm. From everything you've seen, what actually reduces crime?
From an individual point of view, what reduces your likelihood of becoming a criminal is your upbringing, primarily. And if you've been bashed around and badly parented or serial parented or suffered parental abdication when you're young, you're likely to go off the rails as you grow up. But if you've got a strong family with strong moral compass, you're far less likely. Christians, for example, people who are brought up in very religious households seldom become criminals, because they have a very, very strict moral upbringing. But you don't need to be a Christian to be well parented. Basically, if you've got caring parents who take you to football and actually take an active interest in your upbringing, you're less likely to become a criminal. I had a very good early upbringing. My mum was an alcoholic later on, but none of my brothers and sisters have become criminals. I was the only one, but I was going to become a criminal anyway. Not become a criminal, I was going to become a rebel, because I'd have always been rebellious, and I wanted to try drugs. If it hadn't been for drugs, I wouldn't have broken the law. I wouldn't have gone that way. I wouldn't have become a burglar. I wouldn't have become a robber. I was just a drug offender because I wanted to have some fun.
Yeah. Is crime actually getting worse, or does it just feel that way sometimes in New Zealand?
Well, things. There's a lot more violence around now. Murder rates in the 1950s and 60s. There were maybe less than 10 murders a year. Now it's stabilised, the murders a year. There's, I think, 70 or 80 when I retired. I don't keep up with it these days, but it had stabilised. The murder rate went up and then stabilised. It stabilised from about the mid-1980s where murder's concerned. But you have little fads, where crime's concerned. For example, suddenly it has become trendy or fashionable to ram raids became fashionable for a while. And so it's pretty hard to say that crime rates themselves have gone up because different crimes have different profiles and they're affected by different social conditions. During times of poverty, for example, then you're liable to get more property crime. So it's pretty hard to say which crimes have gone up. And of course then there's hidden crimes like sexual violation, which convictions for sexual violation have gone up because more people are reporting sexual violations in situations where in the 50s they wouldn't have reported them because you would have been considered to be partly responsible for leading someone on, for example. Whereas nowadays that doesn't hold any water. You can't say, "Oh, I raped her because she led me on." Yeah, good one. And rape and marriage, of course, became illegal in the 1980s as well. Whereas private to that, part of your conjugal rights, and you couldn't be convicted of raping your wife. And so the profiles change as a result of social conditions and as a result of police and criminal justice policy, and as a result of law changes.
And prison in New Zealand, is it currently working, the system? Does it make people better or worse?
One of the reasons I think that prisons are so violent now. I mean, in fact, all of the murders, all of the homicides that have taken place, all of the prison homicides that have taken place in New Zealand in the history of New Zealand penal policy, all of them have taken place since 1979.
Wow. The
first prison homicide with Keith Ross Hall, who was murdered in Paremoremo Prison A Block, had his throat cut in 1979. All of them have occurred since then. And that has partly to do with the way prison administration has changed. Prison administration has leaned far more towards the American model, unlike when I was in prison, where we were living during a period of great liberalism, and there was the prisons weren't harsh places. And if you treat a dog harshly, you'll get a dog that bites, or a dog that's cowed. But basically you'll get a screwed up dog. And in the prisons these days, they're much harsher, much less forgiving kind of environment, and you get people reacting to that environment, and so thus they're far more dangerous places than they used to be when I was there. But it's also the case that the gangs are far more prominent in the prisons than they were when I was in jail. Quite apart from the fact that Paremoremo, your gang membership was considered to be irrelevant. There weren't that many gang members in jail when I was there, whereas now there's lots. About a third, in fact, I think, have gang affiliations. So that in itself leads to greater violence in prison.
Do you have any idea of what actually works when it comes to reducing reoffending?
Yep.
What do you reckon?
What works is that what happens in prison is less important. All the programs are a big deal now. Psychologists and psychologists, and they play a big part in pretending that they're rehabilitating people, which is bullshit. What really matters is, first of all, the environment you came from.
Yeah. If
you came from a loving, supportive environment, you're much less likely to reoffend than if you came from a dysfunctional, violent, or chaotic environment as a child. Secondly, when you're in prison, if you've got strong support from your family, that same family which supported you when you were young, even though you may have deviated and broken the law and gone to jail as I did, if you've got strong family support when you're in jail, that's a big help. That's a big help. And when I was in prison at a time when there were lots and lots of middle-class drug offenders like me who came from good environments and broke the law. Well, we all had good backup. And there was a saying in Paremoremo Maximum when I was there amongst the Maoris, about 60% of all the inmates in Paremoremo were Maori. And there was a saying amongst the Maoris, the prison's full of Maoris and the visiting rooms full of Pākehās. But the Maoris didn't get visits. They came from these really dysfunctional, chaotic, splintered environments, and a lot of the Pākehās were getting visits, and a lot of Maoris were getting visited from Pākehā visitors as well. So that's a big factor. I mean, I had my family backing me up. I had my dad and my mum visiting me regularly. I had my brothers and sisters visiting me. I had my friends visiting, and I had them doing stuff for me, running errands for me, helping me with when I was doing studies. Mum typed out my MA. I had all that kind of support. And then the third thing is support when you get out. You've got to have those same people who are visiting you when you're in jail, there standing for you and helping you when you get out. And I was really lucky in that respect. And also, it wasn't just my family. You see, I had Bill Hodge and Professor Bill Hodge and Professor Bernard Brown, both in the law faculty at Auckland University, who backed me when I got out. So I had really strong support when I got out, and some research was done by Jared Gilbert and Ben Alley and me. We did a study of, and it was mainly Ben and Jared that did the research, and then I helped write it up. They studied high-risk offenders, a cohort of high-risk offenders who had got out of jail. They were identified as high risk, they got out of jail and didn't reoffend. What were the characteristics of those guys who were high risk of reoffending? What were the characteristics that they had in common, which explained why they didn't offend? And the characteristics they had in common were not that they didn't use drugs. Most of them used drugs when they got out. It wasn't that. It wasn't the programs that they did when they were in prison. It was the fact that they had support during their sentences and when they got out. And when they got out of jail, they became ordinary citizens. They had love affairs. They got jobs. They got married. They got mortgages. They got kids. And that was what happened. And most of the people that I was in jail with, who were from those middle-class backgrounds, nearly all drug offenders, but not all, never reoffended. Some of them had done robberies. Some of them had done, had killed people as well. But they came from good environments, and they didn't reoffend. And the ones who came from dysfunctional environments, chaotic environments, nearly all of them went back to prison. Not all of them. It's not an absolute, because I had a couple of friends who come from very good backgrounds. Now, Pete Atkinson, for example, who is a prolific offender, came from a good middle class background, but he's he's out now and has gone straight, but he's 80, so. But he spent most of his life in jail. But he comes from a good middle class environment background. But he's just an exception to the rule. But nonetheless, the rule is that people who live lives of crime come from tough environments. And tend to reoffend, especially if they've started offending at a youthful age. There's a big correlation between early onset and lifetime history of offending.
Do you think that's part of the reason gang numbers are on the rise? The people that don't have a family suddenly find a family in the gang? Is that why?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The gang is the family that they never had. The gang's the family. The gang provides them with comradeship, meaning. It provides them with an income, especially nowadays. It provides you with status, a sense of personal pride, all the things that an abusive or non-existent family didn't provide will provide you when you get out. If you in the gang, and the book that was written by Glenys Dennehy and me called The Girls in the Gang was actually about that, but it was about women in gangs. But they all came from these rough environments, and they it was her MA. I supervised it, and then we wrote it up as a book, and that's what we found. She did a study of women in gangs, and they nearly all came from terrible environments.
Yeah.
And they were abused as children, sexually abused and physically abused and so on. And that was just normal for them. And that leads to a pretty, a person who can have serious personality problems when they grow up.
All those reasons that you just gave for people joining gangs, they all sound very, very good. But is there actually anything good about gangs?
Well, it provides, it fulfills a need for some people. I know a few gangsters who aren't involved in crime. Not everyone who's a gangster is involved in crime. And so from that point of view, it fulfills a need. It provides, just like joining the police or joining the army. Mm-hmm. It provides you with a reference group, which fulfills a psychological need that all humans have. That is a sense of belonging and a team to identify with. So from that point of view, I think gangs do provide a good thing for some people, but there are also a lot of negative factors where gangs are concerned, and some of those factors have to do with parenting styles, and a glorification of violence, and also inevitably drug use. So the negatives are greater than the positives, in my view. But nonetheless, it's not all negative.
What's the government getting right, and what are they getting wrong when it comes to crime and law and order? What would you be doing if you were in charge?
I'd get rid of the gang patch abolition. I'd let them all advertise their presence.
It's like if someone's racist, you want them wearing a T-shirt, just so you know what you're dealing with.
I'll make it easier to keep tabs on them.
But do we need to be? Does whoever's in charge need to be tougher on crime, or is that not working? Are we tough enough?
I think a lot of. I think I would increase. I would increase a lot of sentences, especially for violent crimes, and I would increase dramatically sentences for white-collar crime and sentences for money laundering. At the moment, you can money launder. Criminals can't exist without money laundering. The money launderers they're the enablers. They should be punished as heavily as the principal perpetrators, but they're not. And likewise, white-collar criminals who fleece millions of dollars off people, I would come down like a ton of bricks on them. And another group I would come down like a ton of bricks on is people who physically abuse children, parents or otherwise, who physically abuse children or abdicate their parental responsibilities, who neglect their children. I'd come down on them. But at the moment, unless there's a sexual element to it, for the most part, get off relatively lightly. And of course, the child protection agencies, SIRPs, the Department of Social Welfare, there have been so many different variations. There have been so many different iterations of these agencies which have time and time again failed to protect children who were obviously being abused and they didn't do their jobs. I'd be firing the people who didn't do their jobs. Whereas at the moment, it doesn't appear that they suffer any consequences at all when they screw up so badly that the child ends up being maimed or blinded or killed. And nothing gets done, I'd come down on them, because that's the genesis of the problems that we have later on. The genesis of the dysfunctional adults is the dysfunctional childhoods they've had.
Yeah,
people who've been well brought up with loving parents and cared for, they tend not to end up in prison. And they tend to be productive citizens.
Yeah.
So, that's where, the feminists have focused heavily on sex crime and the government's responded. But the whole thing about parenting as a whole, crimes towards children which don't carry a sexual element aren't taken as seriously. And that's ridiculous in my view.
Yeah, whenever something happens, like a high-profile one, like Kahui twins or Nia Glassy, there's no one that's not outraged by it.
No, that's right.
The nation's heart breaks every time it happens.
Yeah. So I would come down on them, but you can talk all day about what you would do and what you wouldn't do.
Geez, you've got stories and knowledge for days, eh? I could sit here talking to you forever.
Yeah.
But this young man on the cover of the book, Dream Dealer, what would he make of the 74-year-old man sitting here today?
I'd be quite surprised that I got to go so far, because I never thought that I could ever. When I first entered university as a lecturer at level 3, near the bottom of the lecturer scale, I never would have dreamed I could have ever. I never ever imagined that I could ever have become a professor. But I worked hard and I didn't really know the way things worked in those days either. But I wouldn't have thought. And at that age, of course, I was only 18 when that was taken. There was photograph on the cover of the book was taken the day before I got sentenced to detention in a detention centre, a 3-month prison sentence.
Oh, like a youth boot camp?
Yeah, a youth boot camp, yeah. Which is another thing that doesn't work, incidentally. another example of history, failed history repeating itself.
Yeah, I think it's the sizzle, not the sausage. Like, people like the idea of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Every government wants to be tough on crime.
Yeah. So I would have been surprised to see myself as I am now. Yeah.
How do you feel about ageing in this chapter of your life? I read a quote from you in a Stuff article like 5 or 6 years ago, just when you were packing up and moving from Christchurch to Bay of Plenty, and you said something like you've got 10 to 20 good years left.
Yeah.
So today that's down to like 5 to 15.
Yeah, it's getting low.
But
I'm getting near the end of it.
You're sharp though, eh? Like, your mental recall's great, and physically you're fit.
Yeah, physically fit and mentally hoping not to lose the plot too much in the next 10 years. My memory's becoming not as good as it was, but
I don't know. You've mentioned a lot of names today.
Yeah.
I
tend to remember long-term things. I tend to forget short-term. My short-term memory's not as good as my long-term memory.
What are you most afraid of?
Of being paralysed or having a stroke or something like that.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to be thrown at you. I had a heart attack earlier this year. I had a stent put in. I'm feeling a lot better as a result. Feel real good. I was getting angina when I was out on the bike. Now I've had the stent put in. I don't get angina anymore, so I'm happy about that. But a good mate of mine that I was in prison with, Chris, he had a stroke last year, and is now semi-paralysed down one side of his body. It's changed his life. You know, I'm bloody worried about that. So I take all my meds. I do.
You're still on the drugs,
I do. I'm still on the drugs.
Different drugs
I
these
take
days.
all my drugs.
Crushing them up and snorting them?
Yeah.
If everything stopped tomorrow, what would you be most grateful for?
If everything stopped?
Yeah. If you dropped dead tomorrow, what would you be most grateful for out of this life? 3/4 of a century.
God. I'd be happy about my marriage.
Mm. How long have you been married?
I got married in 2012.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2012.
Jeez, I knew that. I've read your book. I knew that.
Yeah.
13 years.
So I say my short-term memory's not so good. But, been married. I've been married, yeah. But I've got a really good relationship with my wife.
Wonderful. Is this your second marriage or your first one?
No, my first.
Really?
Yeah.
Why did you got married quite old then, didn't you?
Yeah, I was 60, I think.
Why? How did you...
61.
How did you get to 60 years without marrying someone, without getting pinned down?
Because I was a philanderer.
Oh.
A terrible philanderer. And, yeah.
Terrible as you were successful at it? Or?
Yeah, I was... unstoppable philanderer. You know, I really used to just have always
Ladies'
during
man.
my university, lots of different women. You know, lots of women, and several at one time normally. You know, and so I couldn't settle down.
Oh, okay.
You know, I couldn't settle down with one woman, and I didn't see what advantage that would be. And as I said in the book, once I reached my about 50, I started thinking it was time to get serious about girls, you know, and maybe think about having because it's got advantages as well, you know.
Like George Clooney, not settling down until your 50s.
Yeah.
Well, it's worked out pretty good. It's a lot of a life's about timing, isn't it? The right person at the right time.
It's got to be the right. That's dead right. You know, in the past, I've had some lovely girlfriends. Who I could have married had the time been right for me. But when I got married to a Chinese woman called Lucy, and it's worked out really well. We've had some violent arguments from time to time because it's a time to, but they sort of... That was early on, you know. You adjust to each other, and you know what? I know not to push her buttons.
Yeah, who knows?
And as I said in the book, I realised I have to accept how wrong I can be, and how often I can be wrong,
even if you don't necessarily believe it. Yeah. Just waving that white flag sometimes.
Yeah.
Who knows the real you? She knows the real you. Like the complete, you know how...
I know the real me.
Yeah.
Nobody is ever completely honest with their spouse. If you were, you'd never be married.
Yeah. So you know the real you. You like when you're standing in front of the mirror in the morning having a shave, you like who you see?
Yeah, I like myself.
Yeah.
I like him. I like myself. I mean, if I didn't like myself, I wouldn't be the way I was that made me dislike myself. You know what I'm saying? I act in a way that I think is moral and correct, and if I don't, I pull myself up. And there's times in my life, a couple of times that I can think of, and I don't want to relate them, where I haven't treated people fairly, and I regret that for the rest of my life. Where one occasion, there was when I was in jail, we were in this thing where you had to be. Narking was the worst possible thing. You were absolute an asshole if you ever did that. And there was a guy in jail who I liked a lot. And when I got out of jail, someone told me that this guy, it was in a book actually, it was a law book, and this particular person, Mark, that he had assisted the police. Now that can mean anything. That doesn't mean he's a narc. all it means that he had been cooperative, not assisted the police, he'd been cooperative with the police. And that it didn't mean he was a narc at all. It could have meant anything. And he was a good bloke. And I wrote a letter to the guys in Hamilton. This joker cooperated with the police. And he was ostracised in the prison. As a result of that, he was ostracised, and it was completely unfair of me to do that and to jump to that conclusion and make his life a misery. It was a horrible thing to do, and I'm deeply guilty about it. And he actually confronted me one night in a pub after he got out, and he said, "You know what you did to me?" And I just crushed, and I just felt so sick, and and he said, "I'll never forgive you." And I said, "Well, I don't blame you. I'm a bastard for doing that. I should never have done it." And everyone else who was in the jail, they all flopped in, and they ostracised him as well. And I don't know whether he did anything wrong at all. It was completely unfair, and I hate myself for it, But I punish myself every day I think of it.
But this is, I think, a lot about your character, that you're still flogging yourself about this decades later.
Yeah, well, I was in that stink way of thinking that I got out when I was in jail, that we're all thinking that we were doing the right thing if we're pointing out, exposing narcs, But it was over the top. It was completely unjustified, And you've got to flog yourself over things like that. You can't let it go and make excuses for yourself. You've got to face up to the fact that you did a wrong thing to a person and made someone miserable. It was a terrible thing to do.
How old are your grandkids now? Are they at an age where, have they read the book?
No, they're too young.
Too young.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they'll read it one day.
One day they'll read it.
Yeah.
Their mother might not let them.
If they were here, your adult kids or your grandkids, and they had to come up with 3 words to describe your character, what 3 words would you hope they would say?
I'd say I've got an honest heart. That's what I would say. That's one thing I hold highly, and that is honesty, personal honesty. You'll be true to yourself. And I try to be true to me. And that's why there's a lot in that book that people would be ashamed of. And the feedback I've had, they said, "Well, you've been pretty honest about that." Well, that's the way it was. And if you're not going to write an honest account of your life, you might as well not write the account.
Yeah.
You might as well write a novel. And that's not a novel, it's a true account of my life and who I am.
Geez, it's a great book, and this has been a great podcast.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. It's been really nice to meet and connect today. Yeah. How's it for you, reflecting on some of the ugly parts of your life?
Oh, there's nothing really ugly about it. I don't feel... The only ugly things, a couple of things. I was once unfair to a girlfriend of mine. I hate that. But
you've got to learn from it, not do it again.
I learn from it, yeah. But I've tried to be honest and fair with people all my life, and my life's been pretty good, and I think I've been pretty fair to people most of my life. Yeah, and certainly when I'm pretty happy with the way I've lived my life in general.
Hey, well, Greg Newbold, this has been great. The grandkids are going to hear this one day. They're going to learn about the cigar case. Hopefully that happens after you've passed. And hopefully that's many years from now too, by the way. Hey, this has been a great podcast. Thank you so much, mate.
Yeah, thanks.